Welcome to the Leading with Instinct podcast, where we dive deep into leadership, personal growth, and the intuitive nature of horse herd dynamics and how they can give us the tools we need to lead with confidence and clarity. I'm Katie Navarra-Bradley.
And I'm Ginny Telego.
And we're excited to welcome you to this episode of Leading with Instinct.
This is the Leading with Instinct podcast, focusing on intuitive leadership and fostering deep team connections through equine experiential leadership development and coaching. Brought to you by KatieTheCoach.com and the collaboration partners. Now, here's your hosts, Katie Navarra-Bradley and Ginny Telego.
Today's episode, we're going to continue our conversation about cross-generational workforces. And if you didn't listen to our last episode on that, we invite you to check it out. So for this episode, we're going to have a deeper conversation about why millennials and Gen Z team members are saying no to leadership roles. Something that we have discovered is called conscious unbossing. So this is a topic that's vitally important to the future of all organizations and communities. And we want to explore a little bit too how horses use a practical system for ensuring that they're never without leadership, and then how we can learn to prepare our next generation of leaders by changing the way that we see leadership. So Katie, I'm so excited to be here with you again today, and very excited to be having this conversation.
It's great to see you too, Ginny, and I'm grateful that you brought up this topic of conscious unbossing. And as we were preparing to talk about this, it was something that I connect with very personally, because in my last full-time role, I specifically looked for a job where I did not have to manage people. I had earned the reputation for being able to manage difficult employees well. And while that was a nice compliment from my bosses, it was something that definitely took a toll on, my personal life. I was burnt out and thought that the upward path to upper management would only be more of the same. So for me, the solution was to create my own business. And I realized that not everyone can do that. And so, we're here to help folks really find ways to enjoy that management, because our organizations do need managers of all levels. Mm-hmm. And, when I was going through those experiences, to me, it felt like I was kind of alone. I was the only person who didn't want to be in those situations, because it was also probably about 8 years ago at this point where people weren't really talking about this. Mm-hmm. But I'm not alone. In a recent survey by Korn Ferry, there was a surprisingly high number, 72% actually, of the youngest generation of workers who say they'd rather be individual contributors than middle managers. And that trend has given this term that we've talked about, this conscious unbossing. And it's really making organizational leaders worried about what's to come for their workforce. Mm-hmm. Gen Zers now make up 30% of the workforce, and that's going to actually surpass baby boomers in the workplace this year. And what are we going to do when all of those baby boomers do retire out and we need the next generation of leaders to step in? So I just wanted to kind of jump into there, Ginny, and see what you've been seeing as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Katie, and I can relate to you as well. I started being given opportunities to lead fairly early in my career, and if I knew then what I know now, I'm not sure that I would have taken some of those opportunities. And like you, I realized early on that some of those opportunities I was being invited into were because I had the ability to manage lots of different circumstances with people. And when I was early in my career, in particular, from the time I was in my 20s and going forward for quite a long time, being invited into a leadership role was seen as like, oh, wow, they see something in me. And it was something that you viewed as a real opportunity, right? And it was good for your ego, right? Let's be honest. And because we didn't know that we could have a different environment for ourselves, we just thought, well, this is how it is, right? This is, when you're a manager, these are the things you have to deal with, and you have to work long hours, and you have to give up your personal life and all of these things. That was just sort of, that was what it was. That was what you did. And were you were taught that being in that leadership role, right, that's the way forward in your career. That's how you make more money, all of these things, right? So there's all of these narratives around being in a leadership role. And as the next generations behind Gen X started coming in and started questioning that, which to me is what's really fascinating. And I'm a little bit jealous, right? I think, man, why didn't I question that when I was younger? And so I don't see it as a negative necessarily that they're saying no. I mean, I think that we have to pay attention to it, but I think there's opportunity there if we're willing to shift the way that we look at leadership, and if we understand why this conscious unbossing is happening. That it's not because they're lazy, they don't want to work, all of those things, right? When you look at all of this research that we were putting together for this conversation, I thought it was interesting also in this Korn Ferry information that they were talking about the Gen Z and millennials that they interviewed, and they're avoiding it because they see leadership roles as thankless. They've seen their parents go into management roles, and I think this is very. I think it's a little bit more apparent in mid-level management that you see a lot of some of these things, but they saw their parents step into these management roles. It's like, oh, I got promoted. Yeah, I'm gonna make more money, and this could be a stepping stone to something more. But then they also watch their parents get burned out. Mm-hmm. And they saw all of the stuff that their parents have had to tolerate as a manager. And so when you look at that and you say, well, I can still contribute to the organization that I'm working for by being an individual contributor. And if I can make the money that I want and need by being an individual contributor, why in the world would I want to take on all of this extra responsibility and stress and hassle and all of those things for maybe a little bit more money? But what do I have to sacrifice for that? And I think that's the conversation that organizations who are trying to fill their leadership pipeline need to be understanding, is that we have this next generation of workers who really are always weighing the pros and cons of opportunities and saying, how is this going to impact my ability to take care of myself? How's it going to impact my well-being? And so looking at it from that perspective, I think, is important. What do you think on that, Katie?
Yeah, as you were talking about that, it reminded me so much of my own experience. Like you, I was put into a management position at 22, and it was seen as this prestigious opportunity. And I think, now many years later in life, I actually appreciate that experience now more than I did then, because it taught me so many things about what I'm doing now, running my own business. I actually say I got paid to earn my MBA without going to get an MBA. But definitely when you're in it and you begin to have that choice, it becomes this, do I want to keep giving up all of these things in my personal life to make more money and advance up in the company? The other thing that you made me think of as we were talking, and I could not find the name of this book before we met today, but I also read once, because I am that driven person, always looking for the next thing, the next step up, the next way to grow my business or to grow personally and professionally. And sometimes when I was managing, I struggled to understand why not everyone in the organization or on the team shared that same desire. Mm-hmm. And in this book, it actually talked about how our teams need individuals who are those individual contributors. And so I think it's really interesting as we talk about this choice of younger employees to not manage, how do we also still leverage their skills and talents while building that leadership pipeline? Because we really need both in our organizations for them to be healthy and thrive and sustainable.
Yeah, and I think that that really points to the whole conversation around preparation. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that and how the horses come into that. But I do think if we look at the last conversation you and I had about this in our last episode, we talked a lot about how important it is to understand the historical context of each generation of workers. And that historical context is what shapes all of us and how we view everything. And so, if we're understanding that a lot of, particularly Gen Z employees, they came into the workforce more heavily during the pandemic. And that meant that they started out working remotely. They were onboarded remotely. They did all of their, initial getting to know their other team members. All of that was done remotely. And I think that when we're looking at this from the perspective of leadership, because I don't think there's a problem with working remotely. I'm a big fan of it because I do it myself, and my husband works remotely as well, and it works for us, and we're okay with it. But there is something about I think entering the workforce remotely and then trying to figure out how to manage other people without having developed some of those interpersonal skills that you need to have as a manager, right? Because as a manager, you need to be able to guide and coach. You need to be able to understand where your people are coming from, what challenges they're having, and still be having to get things done. And so I think as I was preparing for this conversation today, it really kept coming back to me a couple of things. One is how important it is that we are preparing the next generation of leaders. And right now, as we talked about in our last episode, millennials are in their 40s. So they're not just coming into the workforce. They've been in the workforce. A lot of them are already in leadership roles. But we do want to look at, are there potential people within the millennials and Gen Z generations who we really need to be intentionally preparing in the leadership pipelines, because that is something that organizations are stressing about. They're recognizing their leadership pipelines are kind of at a trickle, where it used to be that there were people were wanting, right? People were asking and saying, when am I going to have an opportunity to be a manager? Mm-hmm. And now that that's not happening, people in talent development are like, they're going out like, hey, would you be interested in this? What would it take for you to be interested in going through this leadership development program that we're putting together? And so I think it comes around to, organizations need to be showing that they have a supportive culture for leaders. And that may entail having some type of mentoring programs for up and coming emerging leaders, really recognizing the importance of work-life balance, that whatever that means for people, but at least recognizing that the days of having people in management positions who are willing to work 80 hours a week and be exhausted that they can't even enjoy the weekend. They're just trying to recover on the weekend. Right. That you have to be looking at those kind of things as an organization if you want to have people wanting to come into your leadership pipeline.
I hope that you don't mind that I share this, Ginny, but when we were preparing for this episode, we had quite a phone conversation, and you had shared at that time that you were working with a client one-on-one through some virtual coaching, mm-hmm. who had this, what they considered a star employee in line for a promotion. They were looking ahead to their succession plan, and they really recognized the great work that this individual was doing. And when they offered them the position, the millennial turned it down. And this leader that you were working with was really just, from what I took away from our conversation, just blown away that this younger individual did not want the role. Mm-hmm. And what we talked about as part of that conversation was getting curious and understanding what is driving some of those responses, and potentially even asking ways that might make that leadership role more appealing. Mm-hmm. And I really thought about that as my husband and I went to visit our young baby horse, Winston, over the weekend, who is just 2 years old, and he is with a colt starter, learning how to function as a horse in a human world, right? So learning what it means to be ridden, to have to work and be a part of the team. And the colt starter and I were having this private conversation about how important it is for him to make learning fun for these young horses. Mm-hmm. And so in his program, that means having taken Winston to the beach and get him in the ocean, to have these gigantic balls out in the space where they're working, and have him push it around, having other horses in the space where they're working for confidence building and just some moral support as they go along. And what I thought was so funny is when the colt starter took Winston out to the paddock to start working with him, my husband, who had not been privy to this conversation, walked up to me and he goes, "Wow, Winston looks like he's having a lot of fun. He's just trotting around with his ears up, not swishing his tail, like looking like work is the greatest thing on earth for him."
Yeah.
And it really stuck with me as we were preparing for this, or knowing that this recording was happening today, because I feel like that's an important part of what we're talking about. Finding ways to, we all have to work. Work is part of life for horses, for humans, but finding a way to create these experiences that lead to positive experiences, so that we all are in our careers and serving those different roles throughout the lifetime of our careers, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is so spot on. Again, a lot of this is a paradigm shift, from baby boomer and Gen X of views of what leadership is, even what does leadership development look like, because if you're asking people to develop their leadership skills in a way that is not engaging, they're not going to do it. They're going to be bored. They're going to say, I don't really need to do this. I'm just going to go be an individual contributor and I'm going to do a great job. I'm not really interested in this because it's boring to me. Right? It's just, I can only sit through so many PowerPoint presentations. And so I think as organizations, talent development professionals in particular, are trying to figure out how do we not only fill our pipeline, our leadership pipeline, but how do we then prepare them? It is important to be looking at what are ways to do that. Now, obviously, you and I both do this work with the horses where, we do leadership and team development in an experiential way with horses. And we know that it's very engaging, regardless of the generation of the participants. And there is actually there's neuroscience behind novel learning. Any kind of novel learning experience is something that engages your brain, creates new connections, and those are the kind of things that organizations need to be looking at, because you can't just keep doing things the way you always did them. There are just a lot of reasons that things need to change. And for younger generations, there's just the things that they're looking at. This conscious unbossing, I think, is really just a fascinating thing, because it's not about refusing to lead. That's not what conscious unbossing is. It's rejecting a system that sees workers as broken, and instead of looking at workers as opportunities, right? How can we take advantage of the thinking, right? The new ways of thinking that younger employees bring to the table. They're able to see things differently. They're able to utilize technology differently. And so how can organizations shift? And some of this, I think, Katie, to me, comes back to our conversation in the last episode about the beliefs, perceptions, and assumptions about different generations. And so this conscious unbossing is just, it's just younger generations saying, you know what? No, I'm making a conscious choice to not be in a leadership role because it's not healthy for me. That's how I feel about it. And we have to validate that to some extent. We can't ignore it. We can't say, oh, stop, you're just being whiny, you're just feeling entitled, whatever those things are. Reality is, as we've talked about with the number of the percentage of the workforce that is millennial and Gen Z, and then we have Gen Alpha coming up, that we have to be looking at those things. Yeah, so Katie, building on what you were talking about with Winston and looking at how important it was to, and is, for his teacher to create a fun learning environment, I also look at how can we change the paradigm of how we see leadership, because I think that is really an important piece of how we get younger leaders to come into the pipeline. And so, in a herd of horses, they share leadership. And the responsibility for the safety of the herd isn't just on one horse. That's very different than how we do leadership and how we teach leadership currently. And so my colleague, June Gunter of Teaching Horse, she created this model called the Diamond Model of Shared Leadership, which is based on this framework around how horses share leadership. I use this in my equine-assisted leadership and team developments because I'm a licensed practitioner for Teaching Horse. But I can tell you it's a real game changer. And when my clients start to see, oh, I don't have to carry all the responsibility, and they get to experience it, it's life-changing for some of them, and it also prompts some of them to step into leadership. Now, what's interesting is, in a herd of where there's male and female horses, there's generally a lead mare, which is a female horse who's out at the front of the herd. There's a lead male horse at the back of the herd, and then there's middle managers. There's a whole lot of, sort of nature stuff you can go into there with how natural herds are structured. But the reality is this happens in any herd of horses, regardless of gender. So if it's a herd of male horses, they will still put themselves into these roles of leading from the front, leading from the back, and then the two leaders at the middle. And everybody in the herd is responsible for keeping the herd safe, noticing what's going on in the environment, and providing information to other leaders so they can discern how to respond. So again, it's not just one horse that is responsible for all of those things, and the rest of the herd is like, yeah, I'm just going to go over here and eat some grass or go do whatever. They have an innate understanding, because they're prey animals, that everybody has to be part of this. So what was interesting for me as we were talking about how do you prepare the next generation of leaders, I was thinking about what happened in my own herd several years ago. So for about 11 years, I had a horse in my herd. Her name was Dolly, and she actually was a miniature horse. I had 3 miniature horses and 2 full-size horses in my herd. Dolly was a miniature horse, but she was an incredibly strong lead mare. And when I say strong, she wasn't like, running around and, yelling at other horses, which is what people often think, that's the lead horse, is the horse that's going around and kicking all the other horses out from the feed. She was very strong mare because she had this ability to just have the steady calmness about her. And there could be crazy things happening around in the environment, and she had the ability to stay calm and discern what needed to happen. Do I need to move the herd away quickly, or is this not a big deal? I watched her stand in between the other members of the herd and something that was potentially dangerous. It was fascinating to watch her be the lead mare. And so she passed away, unfortunately, in 2021 from a respiratory infection. So it was a very unexpected opening for leadership in my herd. And I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. I had two other mares in my herd, And neither one of them, to me, in my limited human view, neither one of those mares had indicated an interest in stepping into that role. And they were both very good sentinels, the other two mares. So I really was curious to kind of watch what would happen with Dolly being gone. And after a couple of weeks, one of my other miniature horse mares, Cookie, she started to exhibit some behaviors that she was starting to take on this role of being the lead mare. I noticed her starting to be more observant of the herd and the environment. I noticed her starting to have a more calm, steady energy. Previously, she sometimes could be a little more reactive, but I started noticing her being more steady. I started noticing her positioning herself in locations to protect the herd, and really, really discerning how to use her energy. And I thought a lot about, I was like, how does she know what to do? Because she hadn't been in a leadership role in the time that I had her. What I started to realize, though, she lived with Dolly. And as I watched Cookie stepping into the lead mare role, it became very apparent to me that Dolly had been mentoring her the whole time. And so when the time came that Cookie needed to step in, she knew what to do, and she didn't question it at all. And it just really made me think about, how are we preparing the next generation of leaders? Are we giving them the tools they need? Not the tools we think they need, but are we giving them the tools they need? Or are we just expecting them to take on leadership roles, lead through trial and error, which, is going to happen. But I wonder if there's a way to create a little bit less trial and error so that stepping into leadership roles isn't something that they consciously decide not to do.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about Dolly offline and about the role she's played in your herd, and it's always fascinating to me to hear you talk about her mentoring the others. And, when I was thinking about my own herd, they're very different ages from yours. I have two young horses, one that's Winston's 2 and Leroy's 3. And then I have an older mare who is 17. And you would think that she would be the calm, steady one. But it's really the young ones that are actually stepping up to have that calmer presence. And I think it is because they had a really strong mentor in their other herd. And so it just makes me think about really going back to some of those stereotypes and misperceptions that we may have of different generations, that really we can find younger individuals within our organizations who, given the opportunity, once they've been mentored or if they've had somebody that they can look up to, they are ready to step into some of those roles, whether they may even realize it until they're put into them, but helping them realize that they have the skills, they have what it takes to lead, and then helping them find that confidence to really allow them to step into that role.
Yeah, and I think that really is the important piece, right? Is that we're recognizing that we have potential leaders all around us. In our organizations, they're there. The question is, are we looking in the right way, or are we looking through this other filter? And it made me think, just as you were talking, Katie, about, I've mentored a lot of younger leaders, and in particular in our work of doing equine-assisted learning, I want younger people to be coming in to do this work because I want it to continue for generations to come. And I've seen the opportunity to provide learning experiences where these younger leaders have the opportunity to be in situations where they might be a little uncomfortable because everything's unknown, this uncertainty of being out with the horses. But when you provide them with the opportunity to navigate some uncertainty, but within sort of a safe container, which is really what we're doing in our work with the horses and this experiential work, that's where I see them starting to realize that they can be uncomfortable and be out of their comfort zone, and also they can navigate through it. And it gives me the opportunity to coach them through it, just like you do with your clients. And what I've heard from my younger clients that I'm coaching is they really start to grow their confidence. Because at the end of the day, I think that stepping into a leadership role really comes down a lot to your own self-confidence. And if you are afraid of failure, which most of us have a fear of failure, some are at different levels. But if you have a real fear of failure, then you're not going to be as willing to step into those. And so what I see with a lot of my younger clients is they realize they can sort of face that fear, right? Maybe it's a fear of conflict. Maybe it's a fear of, being seen as incompetent, whatever those things are. When they come out with the horses and they're getting coaching alongside of that, right? We're not just throwing them out there and saying, go do this and then laughing if it doesn't work. When we're coaching alongside them and you see their confidence start to build, and it's so beautiful, right? Because the horses are just giving information. And that moment when the client chooses to shift something or they find their confidence and the horse says, oh, I want to come with you, it's so powerful. And so how do we take those kind of experiences and create a new framework for developing our leaders? And I know, Katie, we had some great articles that you and I pulled for this, and we'll definitely, I think, want to put those links in the comments for this episode. But let's talk a little bit about what organizations can do in order to help people. So I know I found this article in Fast Company that had some really great information on that. Do you want to touch on a couple of those things?
Sure, I would love to. And this Fast Company article was really fascinating to read. And so some of the things that they, recommend for leaders is find ways to create a positive impact or opportunities for a positive impact. Because one of the great benefits of being a leader is that not only are you advancing in your career, but you have an opportunity to create positive experiences for those around you and for those who are on your team. So when you do that as mentoring a younger leader and bringing them in, it really helps them see the benefits. It's not just about their career, it's about others as well. Of course, the other one is pay, right? When you do step up into a leadership role, there is often the opportunity to increase your salary, but it also makes you more marketable as an employee, because you can take those skills and apply them, in the current position you're in, or if there's an opportunity to move on, it allows you to be prepared for those roles. And so that's another way that young leaders can see stepping into leadership roles is a positive move forward in their career. This one is one of my favorites is autonomy, because even though you're working in an organization, when you're a manager, you have a lot more latitude than when you are first starting out in your career. And so giving folks an opportunity to have that autonomy, as a manager really opens up a lot of opportunities for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an important one. And I think building on what you were just talking about of taking advantage of the opportunity to develop your leadership skills to make yourself more marketable, anytime that you have the opportunity to grow as a person, I think everybody should take that. This was interesting that in this Fast Company article around this idea of growth is learning new things is significantly correlated with happiness, which was in a study that was published in the Journal of Happiness Studies. Who knew there was a Journal of Happiness Studies? Right. Everybody needs to read that on a regular basis. But this idea that learning new things is correlated with happiness, I think that leads us to say, listen, if you're going out and you're investing the time in yourself, right? You're growing, you can develop your own happiness. But as organizations, if you want your people to be more happy, how can you create opportunities for them to grow? And so, whether it's giving people new projects, giving them expanded responsibilities, all of those things are ways to grow yourself and grow your people. And that isn't always about somebody else giving you that opportunity. Sometimes that has to be you asking for the opportunity. Mm-hmm. So, I think that being able to have a culture that has that kind of environment where managers and leaders are going out and they're willing to let go of some things to provide growth opportunities, because that might be a whole other conversation for us to have on a podcast. Because that is something, right? Delegating is often very hard because a lot of people who are in management roles say, well, it's just easier for me to do it myself. Well, but how are you now contributing to this leadership pipeline issue by doing that? So, I would love for us to start addressing this conscious unbossing through some of these avenues.
Ginny, I think we've had another wonderful conversation today, and we've left listeners with some action steps they can take, whether they are a millennial and Gen Z leader themselves, or they're an older leader looking to build their pipeline. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great place to wrap up our conversation for today, and hope that within this episode we've provided some helpful insights that you can use, the wisdom both from the horses and from some of our experiences, to create momentum for the next generation of leaders to say yes to taking on leadership roles.
Yeah.
Yes. And we would love to hear from you, our listeners. What strategies are you using to prepare emerging leaders? If you're a millennial or a Gen Z, what has made you say yes or no to a leadership role? Please, keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts with us on social media. Reach out to us. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like us on your favorite streaming platform, subscribe, and leave a review.
Awesome. Katie, so good to be with you today.
Same here, Ginny. So until next time, stay grounded, stay connected, and always lead with instinct.
This has been the Leading with Instinct podcast, focusing on intuitive leadership and fostering deep team connections through equine experiential leadership development and coaching. The Leading with Instinct podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Collaboration Partners, harnessing the collective human potential in organizations since 2009, providing equine experiential learning for lasting change. Get in touch at thecollaborationpartners.com, and by katiethecoach.com, helping entrepreneurs and business leaders reset, reconnect, and reframe to live their best professional and personal lives. Visit katiethecoach.com for more information. For more information about equine experiential development and coaching and the Leading with Instinct podcast, visit www.leadingwithinstinct.com. The Leading with Instinct podcast is available at leadingwithinstinct.com, on the Leading with Instinct YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe today, and thank you for listening to the Leading with Instinct podcast.